this hour, and I'm asking, is it time to scrap HS2? The Sunday Telegraph says the potential cost of Phase 2 of the high-speed line running from Birmingham to Manchester has increased by £8 billion. So even members of the Cabinet are admitting it's the cost the country can ill afford. And during a cost of living crisis, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has admitted it is out of control, whilst Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has called it irresponsible to keep ploughing cash into the project when money could be used locally instead. Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan says that HS2 is a colossal waste of public money, whilst former Conservative Prime Ministers David Cameron and Boris Johnson have encouraged Rishi Sunak to stick with Phase 2 linking Manchester and Birmingham. Now, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are expected to decide the fate of the second phase within days. But with the Conservative Party conference set to be held in Manchester next week, the timing of these leaks very interesting indeed. But I'm asking, though, is it time to scrap HS2? So joining me to discuss is Stephen Pound, Labour Party MEP, Vicky Pryce, Chief Economic Advisor, Benedict Spence, political commentator, and Neil Parish, former Conservative MP. Neil Parish, I'm going to start with you. It's leg 2 of HS2. Is it time to scrap it? It's costing a fortune.
Yes, Nana, I think it is absolutely the time to scrap it. I think you would be better off actually doing up the networks across the country and spending a fraction of that money. I think the value for money for the new line is not there. I think, levelling up happens across, wants to be the west, the east, as well as the north. And I think the trouble is it would suck up all resources. And I think the whole thing has just seemed to spiral right out of control. When you think you're talking about an extra £8 billion, that's not the total cost anywhere near. And that is where I think we really need to share the money. Electrification, upgrading the lines in the West Country. We've got a Honiton to Waterloo line. You could double check that one. Lots of things could be done all across the country, a lot cheaper, and in the north as well. So, like I said, I think it's just really pouring everything into one particular pot. And, of course, we don't have the money. We're borrowing money all the time. And I think people are very, very concerned about HS2. But I would just like to see what resources there are actually shared more evenly across the country.
OK, Benedict Spence.
I think, this is clearly something that has got catastrophically expensive. But does anybody actually trust that this money would be spent better going into other services? I simply don't, because I think that HS2 is simply the largest and most obvious example of a planning system in this country that doesn't work, that isn't fit for purpose. Now, since we started building HS2, other countries across Europe have managed to complete significant numbers of high-speed railways, Spain, Italy being very good examples. And actually, the point is that they didn't cost so much because there aren't quite so many special interests, there aren't quite so many hoops to jump through. And this is the thing, you decide to cancel something like HS2, which I admit I think is frankly ridiculous in terms of how expensive it has got. But it doesn't mean actually that then magically other things will get better. Because ultimately, the problems that HS2 faces are the same that other infrastructures face as well, be it Sizewell C, be it a third runway at Heathrow, be it building houses that people need, be it things like wind farms. Actually, across the country, we're facing something of a crisis of infrastructure building in that we are incapable of doing any of it. So by all means, turn around and say HS2 is too expensive. I would agree with that. But ultimately, it's not going to improve anything else being built. And we badly need these things. We are being left behind by our competitors.
But do we really need it? It will cut down the journey time from London and the West Midlands. Will cut down the journey time from 1 hour and 21 minutes to 52 minutes. Do we really?
It also increases capacity, though. This is the point.
But nobody's travelling. But people aren't travelling on trains as they did before. So the whole situation has changed.
Again, this is part of the government's grand idea about how we're going to sort of move to a net zero. I don't believe in net zero particularly, but a sort of a post-car is actually building out train capacity. And if you want to do that, you need to do these sorts of things. I understand, a lot of people would say who aren't particularly au fait with that idea would say, well, then it's not necessary. But I'm sort of sat here as a neutral saying, if that is what the government wants, you can't justify scrapping, upgrading your rail network because nobody expects that putting it into services between Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds or Hull, nobody expects that that's going to work either because they'll run into the same kinds of bureaucratic problems.
But that's 3 times the cost they started with. Vicky Pryce.
It's interesting. We're talking also about Birmingham to London, whereas, of course, what has been announced, or at least we think is going to be announced, or may be announced, is about the further phase of HS2, which is from Birmingham to Manchester, given that the other one to Leeds has already basically been scrapped. There is a question even about the value for money for phase one, if you like, the one for Birmingham, given that we're not necessarily going to be able to do this in 54 minutes to central London, because it's not actually going to be going to central London. So there is an issue there. You probably asked me to come on this programme thinking that I would be in favour of the whole project. But in reality, if you look at most economic analysis that has been done on this, the value for money is not proven to any extent. What they did originally was look at the whole thing in relation to saving the time that you take to go from London to Birmingham, for example, and further up. Then, of course, we all discovered that we can work from the train, so there's no much point in saving that. Then, of course, we had to redo this, or they had to redo it by looking at the capacity issue, whether indeed you release a lot of capacity, not necessarily worrying about the fact that people have now changed quite significantly the way in which they work, so they don't go to the office very often, they don't travel as much. And the forecast for the future are that, in fact, those transport figures that had been there at the beginning are not going to be there in the future. And then third, they added an extra element, which is levelling up. So disentangling those various bits is going to be very difficult. And also disentangling each phase of it and seeing what the real value for money is going to be is absolutely necessary now before any decision is made. And we haven't had that done at all.
But Vicky, sometimes, I mean, coming back to Benedict's point that they will probably spend the money on something else, we don't know what to spend it on anyway, but also there's a lot of people employed, what is it, 30,000 people or whatever employed to keep this project going. So there is some benefit, I suppose. So those people, it's keeping the company going in terms of employment as well.
Well, of course, but you could imagine that they can do something else, but there is a lot of construction going on anyway. But the interesting thing is we don't seem to worry particularly when 12,000 people lose their jobs, when Wilco goes down, for example. Yeah. But we do seem to worry hugely when 35,000 people possibly are going to lose their jobs in Sweden. I'm not suggesting that, engineers are not particularly important, and they are, and we need them, but surely they can find something else to do which may be preferable, and that thing which is preferable is combining the various cities in the north, the ones that absolutely need it. We have a network which needs huge amount of attention, and the Birmingham to London route or the other way around may well just benefit London, because everyone will just be trying to come down rather than it actually leading to the levelling up that we all want to see.
I suppose they could all start building the pylons that we're going to need if this net zero nonsense carries on. Stephen Pound.
No. May I, in the finest tradition of GB News, present an entirely alternative perspective on this one? Are we the nation that invented the railway systems? Are we the nation which gave this system to the world? Are we to slink away from this glorious proposal like whipped curs with our tail between our legs and say the Spanish can do it, the Japanese can do it, the Italians can do it, but we in this country cannot even manage it? No. As far as I'm concerned, I want more freight off the roads, onto the rails. I want to increase the capacity. I want to make the railways more profitable, more socially acceptable, more useful. And anyone who suggests for a minute that we should pull the plug on this is whinging and whining and actually slinking away from something which should be a glorious achievement of this nation. Can you imagine the contempt in which we would be held by the world if we were to say this nation can't even manage to build a railway line?
Well, they're already laughing because the other countries have built about 3 in the time of the space that we haven't even built 1. Yeah. And also, we picked the wrong gauge. We should have picked Isambard Kingdom Brunel's. We picked George Stephenson's. It's too thin, and we could have had much wider rails, and that would probably be better and helped our capacity. Neil Parish, final word to you.
Yeah, just as much as I love Stephen Pound, I think it's a case of let's share the money across the country. I think you'll find when it's paid for nationally, it's paid by for all taxpayers. And I think the country wants to see it shared out, electrify a lot of the railways, increase the capacity, the signalling. Let's do all that before we go on this vanity project, which is costing more and more money. So much as I love Stephen, I am going to disagree with him totally this afternoon. All
right, so it's a yes or no. Stephen, should we scrap HS2?
Absolutely not.
Vicky Pryce, yes or no?
Yes, and not worry about the sunk costs at all that we've
Benedict
spent so
far.
Absolutely not.
No. And finally, Neil Parish.
No.
Yes, most definitely.
Right, well, listen, thank you so much for your thoughts. Really good to talk to you all. That's, of course, Neil Parish, former Conservative MP. We had Benedict Spence, political commentator, Vicky Pryce, Chief Economic Advisor, and also Stephen Pound, former Labour Party MP.